Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's interview with Buffy Sainte-Marie and Jewel. We have, I assumed that by listening to your music and reading your stories and learning about you, there's so many similarities between the two of you. I assumed that you knew each other, but then I just found out that you don't. So it is even more of an honor to be able to introduce the both of you. And I'm incredibly honored to introduce singer-songwriter, poet, actress, two times New York Times bestselling author and mental health expert, Jewel, and Academy Award winner, trailblazer, and Cree singer-songwriter, Buffy Sainte-Marie. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
There's so many similarities between the two of you. I'm going to start with your spirit, with the pioneer spirit that you both have. Jewel as an Alaskan, Buffy as a Cree. You were born in Canada and grew up in Massachusetts. You're both strong and self-sufficient. You both had adventurous spirits. Jewel, I read that at the age of 15, you actually rode your horse 15 miles to and from work at 15. Can you describe what it was like growing up in Alaska and how that was really important to the formation of you as a person and as an artist?
It is interesting when you look at a little map and you put pins where all the singer-songwriters come from. A lot of us do come from the northern climates, from Canada. I think Canada is a treasure trove of songwriters. And maybe I snuck in there a little bit with Alaska. Alaska, you know, is big country. Nature is God to me. So I was raised in the most beautiful church. Despite the, abuse in my background, when you have that kind of nature, you get given medicine. And that open space and that quiet causes you to go inside, which is such a gift because very few people get that gift. We're given things that distract us all the time now. So to be raised in the quiet, to hear the whispers of the wind, to understand how we're connected, to want to contribute to that connection, and that circle definitely informed me as a woman, as a songwriter, for sure.
And Buffy, you're from Canada, but you grew up predominantly in a white community in Massachusetts. And growing up as an Indigenous person in this community, how did you find your identity? How was your experience growing up?
Well, no wonder you thought Jewel and I knew each other because everything you just said, Jewel, sounds like me. Very similar. I lived in a small community in Maine, and I went to school at the University of Massachusetts. So Maine and Massachusetts were a part of my growing up experience. Like many Indigenous Canadians, I was adopted away from Indigenous communities, and I was raised by a mostly white family, but my adoptive mom was part Mi'kmaq. But she didn't know much about it, or as the late Charlie Hill, Oneida Cree comedian used to say, oh yeah, we're Indian, but we never practiced it, So there are so many people who have been taken away from Indigenous community and raised elsewhere, and it's always a unique and different story as to how we get back. So I was raised by a wonderful mom who told me, what you read and hear about a lot of things in this world turn out not to be true, and maybe when you grow up you can go out and find out. So that was kind of my first airline ticket right there.
Yes, wow. Jewel, your family sang folk music from the old country instead of saying prayers before each meal, I read, and music passed down to generations. You have written that songs are history and the story of us and are used for healing. How much of your family's respect and reverence for songs helped shape your beliefs and approach to music?
Some people have physical heirlooms. We had heirlooms that were songs, I guess. That was my heritage. My grandmother had been an aspiring singer and a poetess when she left Europe just before the Second World War, and that's what caused her to want to settle in Alaska and homestead. And so she raised her kids singing and writing in nature. There's no electricity and no running water. Singing was a big part of it. It was a hard life for my dad and his siblings, but there was a lot of music, and it is amazing what an antidote that can be. I was raised in a very creative family. It's just sort of what my family did. Everybody wrote songs and everybody taught themselves instruments. And so I felt lucky for that. You know, I was also raised bar singing at a young age. And what I was seeing in bars was people in pain, people trying to process pain. And they did it with alcohol and drugs and abuse and violence. My dad was abusive. He had a lot of PTSD. And I realized none of us outrun pain. So what do you do with pain? And writing helped me with pain. And that's what got me very addicted to it. It was just a way to process my environment. And it made me calm.
Well, Buffy, you had a lot of the same type of situations growing up with abuse and that sort of thing. And when I was going through both of your stories, I thought that I would feel fear from you because you've both been in such scary places in your lives. But I don't feel that at all. You know, how do you overcome that? How do you push through the fear and the pain, whether it's songwriting or just in your everyday life? How do you find positivity and happiness in that in your life?
You know, I had a kind of a strange growing up. So I had abuse in my family too, Jewel, and but I also had the women in my family were really nice, and they didn't know that there were pedophiles and bullies in the house. They just didn't seem to recognize it. It just was unexpected. And I was told that I couldn't be a musician because I couldn't read music. Turns out I'm dyslexic in music. So I was shunned and shamed in my growing up life. I couldn't pass music classes. And I was also told you can't be an Indian because there aren't any around here. Or there might be some over there in Arizona, but there aren't any more. So this sense of you are not was very early for me, but I knew better because I would go home after flunking music class and play fake Tchaikovsky and at home just by ear like you did. And it's interesting how kids who are raised in rural circumstances or otherwise isolating circumstances, we learn how to make our own fun. And that's why I think, your comment about the North but I think it applies to a lot of rural places. And what I learned how to do was to find my own fun. And so when I was being bullied in school or at home, or if there were pedophiles trying to do their thing, I learned how to hide and escape, but mostly entertain myself. And so music and even wondering, creative wondering and prayer in nature, as you say, Jewel, those are the things that really helped me to deal with abuse, anger, fear. I pulled back and I built something that I did like. So I don't know what you call that, but I think a lot of natural musicians do it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm dyslexic as well, so it's funny you say that. I can't read music or anything. So it's funny. More parallels. I think with the great thing about music is, obviously it's cathartic for the person doing it. I engaged in music for medicine. I engaged in music to learn how to heal myself. I engaged in music to soothe myself. I wrote songs that would say things I wished somebody was saying to me. And I think that kind of is the job of art. Art is free therapy. It needs no permission to speak to your soul. And it's magic. There's some kind of divine magic that happens when a song leaves our lips and is heard by somebody else, because their own wounds, their own pain, their own, I don't know how you would call it, but they know the medicine they need and they take what they need from the songs. It's a very, I would say, holy thing to be a part of. I definitely can't say it's me doing it, but you are aware that, all of our hearts are destined to be broken. It's what we do with the pieces that make us extraordinary. And the quicker you can get to getting very curious about what do I do with the pieces, the little world Buffy was talking about, like, what do I do with these pieces? How do I make this work for me? The more curious you can get, the quicker you can get there, the more productive you'll be, because none of us are going to avoid pain. And a lot of our social structures are invented to try and help us avoid pain, to give us the illusion of control when it just doesn't work. And, when people like Buffy lend her talent to putting her pieces together, it does it for other people. It does it for everybody hearing. It starts to pave a way. And, I definitely wouldn't describe Buffy as somebody afraid, just very courageous.
You know something? For the longest time, I've been wishing that the Junos in Canada, like the Grammys in the US, I've been wishing that they would do like a 2-minute, like they do an in memoriam. I wish that they would just show photograph after photograph of all the great musicians who can't read music, who are natural musicians. People like Chet Atkins. And one time I asked Chet, I said, yeah, the boys all give me the business because I can't read music. And he said, you know what I tell people when they ask me if I can read music? And I said, no, Chet, what? And he said, not enough to hurt my playing. And people like Elvis Presley and Wes Montgomery, Eric Clapton, Michael Jackson, so many musicians are natural musicians. And there's nothing wrong with approaching music by reading if that's how you get into it. But there's also something very wonderful and right that's seldom celebrated because it doesn't make any money. A lot of us make music naturally. We didn't pay somebody to learn how to transcribe it from something else and back into music. So there's all kinds of ways to be a musician, and natural is, I guess, the way the two of us are.
And music's a birthright of all humanity. Everybody used to gather around the fire and participate. Everybody. You sang or you drummed or you danced. Everybody participated in music. It's very encoded into our DNA. And at some point it became elite, where only the special people did it, which is too bad. And the more we can give that back to people, I think the better.
Well, and both of you, and being natural musicians, and even if you were learned musicians, you both infuse so much emotion into your work, into your craft. And definitely as a fan, everything that you do that has so much emotion moves me so much more than if the guitar lick was technically perfect or, something like that. So where does that emotion come from in you? I mean, clearly, maybe that's not an easy question to answer, but how do you take a song and infuse it with that emotion? Or is it just natural, part of the natural process? Yeah.
It also is what you value. Everybody values something differently. A lot of people will participate in their art based on their psyche, right? If you're insecure, you might use your art to make yourself seem perfect. I always liked the artists that used art to lift the veil back. So I liked Bukowski at a young age, or Anais Nin, because they were so willing to use art to be really honest, to help me, a little girl in Alaska, feel less strange, because I didn't feel like the people in the magazines. And frankly, nobody does. So I do think it has to do with your intent too. Like, I like to use music to help me feel, and I want you to feel it as intensely as I feel it. I also don't value perfection, so I'm not going to sing that way. I also don't listen to Barbra Streisand. No offense, Barbara. I love you. You're very accomplished. I just like Sarah Vaughan more because it's just a little more dangerous. I don't know what she's going to do. She doesn't always land the note. So I think we make the art that we value as people. I don't care for perfection as much as I care for emotionality, and it's all trade-offs because you can't be it all.
But with that, both of you carry such authentic messages in your work, in your songs. And, Buffy, you had talked about how really accomplished, famous musicians, they may start off with a really authentic message and championing a cause and bringing attention to it. But then as things go, as their career progresses, they may veer away from that and not have as much of a message in their song. And today, with how we've moved into this sort of cancel culture world, how important is it to still carry that authentic message in your song?
Songwriting for me is just like taking snapshots of whatever's going on. So I don't think about it in terms of, well, today the slogan is cancel culture, but I really don't understand why some of the great writers are not writing about today's issues. I don't understand that at all. You know, we could make a long list of wonderful songwriters who used to do that and they don't now. And, you know, if you're cynical, you say, oh, they made all their money, now they're just going to go home and enjoy it. But I truly don't understand it. When it comes to emotion, I mean, the kinds of singers that I liked Edith Piaf and Carmen Amaya, she was a flamenco. And for me, the emotional part of singing, you know, when I get emotional, my throat kind of closes up a little bit. You know how it is when you see a woman on television who's being interviewed and she's talking and then suddenly she loses control and now she's talking like this because she's ready to cry. That's what that's about. When you get emotional, your throat kind of gets restricted, and this gives me an incredible vibrato. And I get teased about it somehow, but that's where it came from. And from the very beginning, I was singing both issues songs and everything else, you know, country songs and play party songs and whatever. I didn't know any better. And I also didn't know any better than to listen to myself when I was singing, because I was all about the content. I was all about what the issue was about. And I couldn't get it. I mean, Judy Collins and Joan Baez weren't going to sing my songs. I was the competition. So I was the only one. And I was emotional about the things that I was writing. And so that vibrato would show up in the more emotional songs. And it's not as though I champion emotion. I do like Celine Dion or Barbara Streisand, who are kind of more like a virtuoso violinist. And as a matter of fact, when I'm editing a song, after the inspiration has calmed down a little bit, I do kind of turn into somewhat of a perfectionist, because I get to be like the college girl that I was when I'm trying to get an A from some professor who does not like me and doesn't like my theme. And I want to get an A+ out of the guy and have him love it. So I'm not trying to scold him and I'm not trying to hurt him. I'm trying to give him something that he actually didn't know about until my little theme came along. So that's when I turn into a perfectionist. The delivery.
So along the lines of education, Buffy, you created the Cradleboard Teaching Project back in 1997, which is an online learning program to raise self-identity and self-esteem in present and future generations of Native Americans by introducing them to enriching and accurate information about Native people. You're obviously an early pioneer of online learning. With the whole world using online learning in 2020, was it surprising to you how long it took for the world to catch up to where you were?
No, it wasn't surprising, but it was an ongoing pain, because when we were first taking kids online in the late 80s in the Cradleboard Teaching Project, it was really, really hard. Being online wasn't what it is today, but we were having online exchanges between the two schools. We would twin pairs of schools, and we were operating in 18 states. We'd twin a school from, for instance, a school where my cousin was teaching at Star Blanket Reserve in Saskatchewan. We twinned him with one of my local schools here in Hawaii, who are multicultural schools, non-Indian schools, and we put the indigenous schools into the driver's seat of delivering their own self-identity to their partner class and the rest of the project. So we were writing things like science through Native American eyes, geography through Native American eyes, government through Native American eyes, not just in order that we can make our kids feel proud, but so that we could teach non-Indian kids something. They're being denied all the time by only knowing the pecking order European traditional curriculum that doesn't include all the wonderful things that they're missing. So it was really a gift to both sides.
And you continue, the Cradleboard Teaching Project is still active today.
No, we're not.
No, it's not.
No, we transitioned when Bush came into power and was threatening to privatize all the foundations. I knew that Buffy had to go back on the road in order to pay all of our regional teachers. And no, we're not operating now. But if there's any hot CEOs over there who wants to step in, I don't want to be in the office, but it's a wonderful project, and we're operating different kinds of pieces. What I did was I gave it to universities to do their own versions.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Jewel, you also have an online learning platform called the Never Broken Program, which gives tools for mindfulness, calming anxiety, and assessing inner knowledge, making happiness a habit, which I love. And you also have Inspiring Children, which helps kids with housing, food, other necessities, and tools for emotional and mental health. Did you find that more people were using your program in 2020 with all of the stress and all the issues that came about because of the pandemic?
Numbers definitely increased. I've always been interested in, I moved out when I was 15, and I knew that kids like me end up becoming a statistic. And I didn't want to feel like my life was over at 15. I didn't want to feel like my fate was sealed, because I had learned what I called a bad emotional language, a bad emotional English. Abuse, we have a genetic inheritance, and we also have an emotional inheritance. And my dad swore he wouldn't grow up to be abusive, but you can't exist in a vacuum. This world requires action of us. And until you're given a new behavior to practice, you can't get rid of an old behavior. So for me, that journey really began at 15, not having resources, of like, where's a human school? Where do you go to learn all the things I wasn't taught in school? And so it was a lot of reading and that type of thing. And when I became homeless at 18 is when I really started to develop very practicable exercises that would rewire me, that would rewire habits. It was really an exciting time. And then maybe 18 years ago or so, I wanted to see if there were kids who also didn't have family structures, traditional networks of support groups or therapists. Could these kids change their lives? And it turns out they can. And it's really fun. Somewhere between us moving out of the village as a humanity and becoming industrialized into urban environments, we lost a lot of our way. We lost a lot of coming from our heart. We lost the knowledge of what to do with pain. We lost a lot of connection. And I think the whole world has been trying to find its way back to that connection. And now we're being asked to do it as a global community and fighting through things like cultural erasure, that Buffy's talking about. I think that our technology has progressed, but do we get to call this progress if we're killing ourselves at alarming rates? Prior to the pandemic, suicide rates had gone up 70% since between 2006 and 2018. 60 to 70% across almost every demographic. So pre-pandemic, we were already facing a pandemic of connection, a crisis of connection. And I think that our technology has evolved, but I think if we don't start incorporating some of these ancient wisdoms, some of the things that we wanted to throw out in the name of progress, these cultures that we were calling savages that had incredibly wise medicine for humanity, we have to go back to reclaiming some of that if we're going to find our way forward without collapsing. So that's kind of what I love doing. Sounds like what Buffy loves doing too.
If I can jump in, I'd just like to give a little plug for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mohawks, the Senecas, the Cayugas. What was so incredible, one of the things that they used 100% of the adult human brain power instead of just using 50%. The clan mothers were the ones who sent the legislators in. They were the ones who created the government, and those were the ones. The women of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy are just an example for anyone to study if you're trying to make better government, because the male way of looking at things and the female way of looking at things are often very different, and yet they're real supportive if you get them both going at the same time. So I think that's something that a lot of people who right now who are thinking about, Me Too kind of stuff and just making a better world. Oh, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy are the ones to study first.
Wow, yes. And outside of governmental leadership, I'm going to throw this out there because I know that you're both students of philosophy and philosophers. And I had read Plato's Allegory of the Cave years ago, but I recently reread it, as both of you have inspired me. And, Plato believed that you have to have the desire to learn new things, and that if people do not desire to learn what is true, you cannot force them to learn. In today's world, I think we see this every day. I see this in my own life. I see it on the news. How do we inspire others to learn and care about other people? a hard question, isn't it? I think about that so much through music. I think you both do that through your learning platforms.
I something I'd like to say is that I think that each of us is in our own stage of ripening. I think everybody's ripening, even the folks that we don't like. I think each one of us is ripening at our own pace, and I think it's. I had the opportunity to be one of the people who got to ask a question to the Dalai Lama, and if I could sit down and talk to him, that's what I'd be asking. I mean, each of us is ripening at our own pace, and I don't know how possible it is for a sixth grader to talk to a first grader. And I think that the most that we can do sometimes with some people is to really offer almost a cookie, offer something sweet. I know in my own songs, when I know that some of my own songs are going to be heard by people who are brand new to anything indigenous. And when I first wrote My Country, 'Tis of Thy People You're Dying, or Now That the Buffalo's Gone, people just said, oh, the little Indian girl must be mistaken. So you have to understand as a concert performer, or just as an artist in the world and addressing the world, that your audience doesn't have the background to know about your own personal issue, even if it's not music. And so I think that we have to be very careful and charming. I think that, seduce is kind of the wrong word, but I think that you really have to. I was on Sesame Street for a long time. I was on Sesame Street for 5.5 years. And so much of what I loved about them is they were truly child friendly. And besides getting a philosophy degree, I also got a degree in education. And as a teacher, you're not trying to scold the audience, or as a teacher, you're not trying to scold the student. No, you're trying to give them something wonderful. So I think that's the unique thing that as artists we can do. We can wrap a hard to understand issue in small words and in a very small package, because the art of songwriting, how wonderful. If you can say in 3.5 minutes what somebody else will have to write a 400-page book about, and the book winds up on the shelf, but a song, it's immediately replicable. Everybody else can sing it. They can take it home with them. They can put it into another language, They can play it on any instrument. It can last forever. It can be changed a little. Just the art of songwriting can be it can be a cookie. It can be a lovely way to teach. And yet you have to understand that your audience is not there to be lectured to or scolded. They're there and you're going to give them a gift. What do you think?
I think that, never being didactic or preachy is really critical. And the whole attitude that Buffy just embodies and exudes, just so potently is enthusiasm. Is beauty. And I think that for modern activism, that's really important. We can't let bitterness consume us, because that creates a chemical change in our hearts. And knowing that sometimes the most profound activism is you thriving, is you seeing the good, is you promoting and propagating beauty, is you reaching for that person instead of writing them off. It's sort of what is so toxic about cancel culture is nothing can change in shame. Nothing can change in isolation. And you have to connect and bring people along. You have to be them and remind them they are you. And I think, again, the power of music is that if I could maybe create some kind of shift, not that one person can, but the way I think of it in my own life is if we can just help remind people it's a safe place to come from your heart, to have heart, to make decisions with heart, to take counsel from your heart, we've become a very head obsessed world. And I love my head. It's really a critical part of my life. But without heart, it can become imbalanced. And so I don't think we have to teach anything. We just have to show that feelings are okay, basically.
In everything you said, it feels better to not come from that place of bitterness. It feels better to come from the heart and to be flexible. Jewel, I read in your book, one of your touch points, hardwood grows slowly. that things that don't bend break. Can you share more about what that means?
You know, my teacher was nature. I was so lucky. I learned how to be a human from nature. I learned from this tree. As dumb as that sounds.
No,
Oh,
it's not dumb. It's incredible.
And I watched, you know, the trees that grew quickly fell over, and the trees that grew slowly and took their time lasted a long time. And I wanted to be a hardwood tree. And that meant cultivating patience. You know, that meant I had to commit to what that meant. And in a world that has become speed with no purpose, it's almost anti-nature. We're trying to make seeds speed up. You know, it's almost as we don't like ripening. We don't like the time for things to come into a fullness, with no purpose but speed. And I felt for some reason that was dangerous, and that taking my time and trying to be thoughtful about the shape I was growing myself in was important. And it helped me make career decisions. It helped me make decisions that were very long-term thinking instead of short-term thinking. And, you know, it's always a gamble. You know, you don't know how your decisions turn out till you're on your deathbed, but at least it's a guiding star for sure.
Absolutely. You know, Jewel, you've been long drawn to the Native American culture. You learned at a talking circle, which is a Native gathering, about how to speak from your heart, not necessarily writing from the heart, but speaking from your heart. And Buffy, obviously being Cree, you've always been passionate about fueling your songs with the realities of Indigenous people and their culture and the consequences of colonization. And with that, and about what you were speaking, what is the importance of ceremony? Like, what is the importance of, like you just said, stopping, not rushing those seeds? How can the average person learn about incorporating ceremony into their own lives? Is there a process? Is there somewhere you can learn how to do that?
Well, I'm either the best or the worst person to answer that, because I've lived a very isolated life away from community. Even, quite early in my career, I moved to a very rural place. And so my life is kind of big time show business and then do nothing, just hang out with the goats and write and paint and be an artist. So ceremony for me, as I've experienced it in my own Cree culture, is very, very important, but you kind of have to be there. And there's no sense in becoming a Boy Scout and trying to fake it and learning the words and, do it like a play. No, that's not it at all. Ceremony itself in Cree culture, which is done in Cree language, it'd take too long to explain really what it's about. And I'm not going to try to do that. But the idea is, in what ceremony does in a way, is it brings you together and it slows you down to recognize the eternal values that are incorporated in whatever ceremony that is. But I'm not there as often as I wish I were. So I do it at home by myself, but kind of without ceremony, just any time. And like Jewel, just the sacred feminine and just, the universe, Mother Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the sacred feminine as nature is ceremony for me. And you know how it is when you go out and you look at the stars, or it's the morning and you feel that sacred connection to nature. To me, that's the same as where the music comes from. It's just everything. And I don't feel a necessity to sit down and have a ceremony, as I see a lot of my friends enjoy doing. I kind of take it with me even in the airplane. So I guess it's an on the road way of doing it. What do you think, Jewel?
Definitely relate to the on the road way of doing it. I was really lucky, and when I moved out at 15, I don't know what made me go up to this powwow. I think I hitchhiked 800 miles. I was the only white kid. I don't know what on earth I was thinking. But some part of me, I guess, knew I had to be there. And a talking stick was handed to me, and I just froze. I couldn't say anything. I just absolutely froze, and they waited and waited. I couldn't think of a thing to say. And it was interesting. These two men that sort of adopted me later took me for a walk, and they said that my life would require me to learn to speak from my heart. And so funny looking back all those years. It seems obvious now, but it was not obvious then. And I remember going up onto a mountain after they had this little talk with me and just trying to say anything to the wind, anything deeply honest. And I couldn't. I was so frozen, already by that age. The learning to thaw that, learning to really find my voice and be authentic, not just in my writing where it was kind of safe in a journal, but out loud, was important. And boy, has it been important in my life. And the Native cultures, I've been just very blessed in Alaska to be around a lot of Native communities, and be able to bear witness to such a beautiful and profound way of life. And I guess the thing I would say I noticed the most, I guess, are two things. One, ceremony marks time. Ceremony marks the sacred. And in today's world, we hear a lot of people talking about things being sacred, wanting to light sage or, Palo Santo or whatever it is, without a real understanding anymore of what sacred is. And to me, sacred means you make something important in your life and you give it space and importance. And whether you're doing that on an airplane or you're doing that in your room, you're giving it space and importance. It's not cheap. It's not something you frit away. It's a discipline. And I think ceremony recognizes sort of in a moment of time, it marks a moment of time, a passage with a strong intention of what you're wanting to do. It's really important. I think people miss it, It's why so many of us white people are trying to find ways to bring ceremony in whatever ways there are. It's been lost in white traditions for a very long time, I think. It's probably what the churches might, do in their ritual and their ceremony. I think humans have a need for it for sure. But the thing I really notice is much bigger overarching theme is that in the Native traditions that I've been blessed to be around, there's an idea of harmony. You come into harmony with nature. You come into harmony with the spirit of music that's filling you, and you get filled with it and you write. You come into harmony with somebody to hear them, to hear their difference, to hear what they're needing, to hear what they need. We've lost the idea of harmony. I think the world became very obsessed. We're at war with nature right now. We're at war with the seed and how long it takes. We're at war with one another. We want to convince one another of our thoughts. We want to bring them to our side. The idea of harmony is so lost. It's foreign to tell somebody, sit down and come in. I guess you might call it breaking bread, right? Break bread with a Trump supporter. Come into harmony with them. It's not a monster. This person isn't a monster. What do they want? They're very passionate. You have to come into harmony to even begin to cultivate connection, much less change. So I think that's probably what I learned most about. It's not quite directly from ceremony, but maybe just more that culture and way of life.
And we crave it. I think now they try to call it self-care, right? Make time for self-care, but really, it's caring for that inner part of yourself, so that you're solid with yourself to be able to harmonize with someone else and lose all of that hatred and bitterness, and going into a discussion with someone immediately thinking that they're your opposite, that they're against you. So maybe by the world thinking about self-care, Joel, what do you think about that term, self-care?
I'm glad it's being talked about. Everything has an inside out. So, self-care can be profoundly important. I did not take enough care of myself touring. I exhausted myself. I thought I was this inexhaustible resource and wore my health out. So self-care is certainly important. I think being really specific about what that means, because it can be self-centered or it can be coming from a centered self. I would encourage that any of your practices help you come from a centered self, that your self-care practices, your spiritual practices make you grittier. That's something that a lot of ceremony was designed to do, was to put you through some trials to build strength, a grittiness. I think a lot of our self-care culture is very in danger of making us more precious, more particular. Everything has to be just so for us not to be offended. That's not real attractive. We should be getting grittier and tougher and more resilient and more tolerant. And tolerance takes grit. It takes knowing who you are. And that, again, is coming from a centered self. That's why we should spend time in silence. That's why we should spend time building our muscle for being uncomfortable and those types of things.
Absolutely. And Buffy, going back to what you mentioned, you were on Sesame Street, and you were the first woman to nurse a baby on mainstream television. You actually suggested this to the producers because to help normalize nursing, because you were nursing your son at the time, Cody. And what an incredible moment! And I love. I just, it's such an incredible moment. Did you get any blowback for that, or was that just a positive experience for you?
It was totally positive, and I was, I live in Hawaii, and Cody, my son Cody, and his dad, we'd fly into New York to do Sesame Street, and it was exhausting. We were always on the wrong side of jet lag, and doing 2 shows a day, learning scripts, with an infant on your hip. Well, I'm glad that I could breastfeed, because it's a great stress reliever, and I got to cuddle my baby. But it was very interesting the way it happened. I mean, it was so natural and so normal. Sesame Street really are child friendly. And the way that it went was Big Bird was looking out of his nest. I was sitting next to his nest. He was looking over my shoulder while I fed my son. And he said, "What you doing, Buffy?" And I said, "I'm feeding the baby." And he said, "That's a funny way to feed the baby." So I explained that not all mothers feed their babies this way, but he gets everything he needs, and I get to cuddle him. And then, like a real natural child, he just went back to playing. And it's only recently that people ask me, well, wasn't that very controversial? Because these days somebody will put it up on YouTube and somebody will take it down, But there was almost no controversy at the time. I mean, Sesame Street would send me letters, and it wasn't a big controversy at the time. But I went from being like a blacklisted so-called folk singer-songwriter to all of a sudden reaching 72 countries 3 times a day, with the simplest messages, just the down-to-earth messages that I had been trying to do as a concert artist, and with regard to Indigenous people, I just wanted people to know that we exist. We're not vanished. We are present. We have families, we have fun, we have counting, we have numbers, we have mathematics, we have languages. So it was really talking about survivance, not vanishing. And breastfeeding too, it's not really controversial. And yet when I woke up from delivering my son, there was a big basket from a formula company next to the bed. And my doctors didn't know how to teach me about breastfeeding. So La Leche League really helped me out. It was women helping women. See, there's no money in breastfeeding. Where does the money come out? But there is in formulas. And so they fund medical establishments. But going back to natural music, see, there's no money. You can't sell that. Lessons you can sell. You can teach somebody how to decode European notation, but you can't really teach somebody how to be a natural musician. We discovered that ourselves, and like you, Joel, I think that almost everybody is creative right from the get-go. So there are a lot of great things in this world that are absolutely free, but nobody's advertising them because they don't fit into the money situation of the world. That's good news.
Yes. And Jewel, you're also a mother. Your son Case, did you have the same experience working when your son was small, and how did you have any troubles juggling your being a mother and also being a professional?
I think being a mom's different than being a dad. I think being dad's, important. I'm not saying that as bagging a dad. It's just being a mom. A lot's required of us, and it's an honor to fulfill that duty. But I think a lot of moms struggle in the workplace when it comes to childbearing ages. I definitely made different decisions in my career. Definitely changed everything because the center of my gravity changed. And it is kind of funny because in the establishment, when you reach the highs, that you fight so hard to reach, you're not supposed to take a step back. It's like sacrilegious. It's shameful somehow to drop out of the public eye. And there's like, what happened to her? It's so funny to me. but they do put a lot of pressure on you to not disappear. You won't remain relevant, which was always what a terrible thing to tell a woman or anybody. Like, my God, my relevancy just happens to be that I'm breathing. Doesn't mean I'll be popular, but doesn't have anything to do with your value. So I think fighting for women, fighting through ageism, fighting through sexism, it's nothing that ever made me cynical or depressed, because I think probably, I'm guessing similar to Buffy, I felt like if I'm kick-ass at my job, I'll make my way and I'll figure it out. I didn't feel particularly repressed, but I did have to solve for things that you might see your male counterpart not solving for. With having a child, I found it really difficult to find schools that supported us. I do tour for a living, and so my son's going to come with me, but I also want him to have the support structure of schools. And I had a lot of schools in Nashville, which I thought would be super mom music friendly, basically tell me that I was going to ruin my child's life because I wasn't giving him stability. And again, rough thing to tell a woman. Like, women are up against a lot already as new moms. Thinking you're going to ruin your child's life because they're traveling with you and you want them to be able to come back into a group, just seemed like they looked at me like I was an alien. So I found that stuff quite interesting. Being a single mom as a musician definitely was tricky, but super lucky because I get to travel with my son. I get to have my son at work with me. I'm my own boss. I get to work when I want, not when I want. And my son gets to see me do that. I get to be self-possessed as a woman, and I feel very lucky for that.
That's amazing. And speaking of helping others, other artists, lifting other women, Buffy, you have used your clout to help other artists, and I believe you carried around a Joni Mitchell demo tape in your purse for months. You were trying to get record industry people excited about her, and they just weren't having it. Like, tell us that story. That's amazing.
They didn't want to know. No, that's enough Canadians for us. No. They didn't want to know. I don't even want to mention the names for whom I played that tape, because Joni and I had crossed paths somewhere in Canada, or maybe it was Minneapolis or somewhere, and she had come to see me at the Mariposa Folk Festival, and I was doing a lot of radical tunings in those days, and I just wasn't like the other girls. I wasn't singing folk songs. I was writing my own songs, and Joni liked me, and as soon as I heard her, I thought she was just wonderful. I thought she was beautiful. I thought she was smart. I loved how she wrote, and she had started fooling around with tuning her guitar different ways. So I had this demo tape, and I played it for some guys in my agent's office, and Elliot Roberts was a junior agent at the time, and I sent him down to hear her. And of course, he made an incredible career with Joni.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Show business is one of those things, kind of like sports. Nobody wants to let anybody in. And there's so many sharks in any enterprise that makes a lot of money, and a lot of just kind of people who just weren't interested in music at all were on the business side. And that's always been a hard thing, I think, for artists to understand. There's the show and there's the business, and they're two different things. But lucky for me, I have learned more and more to respect people in the business as I've gotten to know people who are really respectable in the business. But, there's a lot of big name businessmen in the music business who just really were not good for artists.
I think it's important for artists too to know that the music business has a terrible track record of finding outliers. I don't know if they've ever done it. It's somebody like Buffy, who's a musician, seeing somebody like Joni, who's going to become a revolution. They didn't see Nirvana coming. They turned Nirvana down 50 times. As a musician, it's not your job to fit in. That's not our job. Our job is to be so yourself that you're undeniable. And you have to roll the dice. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but at least you went down on your sword. At least you went down doing what you believed in. And I think it's the only path to true success, because what the record business is great at is, once Nirvana's king, finding Nirvana 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.500 ad nauseum. Once Britney Spears becomes pop princess, they find all the iterations of it. And so to really have heart and stomach, because it takes a lot of stomach to be an artist. And the more you know about the business, the more of a good parent you can be to your art, the more you can make sure your musical child doesn't become prostituted, that you get to be in a position to parent it well.
And Jewel, one of the stories I loved in your book was about your journey to Mexico. When you were in school, you busked and performed, earning money, hitchhiking from Mexico to Mexico from Michigan. And do you mind sharing the story about how you learned to play guitar and how you found your voice on that trip?
Yeah, I grew up, my dad and I did 5-hour sets in bars, but he sang and wrote. I didn't play any instruments, and I really mainly just sang harmony. And when I was going to school in Michigan, I couldn't afford to go home for spring break, so thought I would hitchhike. And the easy thing just seemed like I would learn some chords. Like Buffy, I didn't know how to read music. And I've always had a bad ear for hearing a guitar and going, oh, that's a G chord, that's an E chord, much less I didn't even know those chords at the time. So I learned 4 chords, and I just sort of practiced where I could get my hand to do that pattern over and over. And I began hitchhiking and really seeing America for the first time, pop culture and hero worship and all of that. And just started making up lyrics about people as they walked by, and did end up hitchhiking through Mexico and then back up to school and got my first song, and that was Who Will Save Your Soul. And it married my love of poetry and writing with my love of singing. And yeah, that was that.
All right. They're giving me the 10-minute mark here. So I'm going to, let's see, we're not live. So is there anything that you would like to talk about in the last 10 minutes? If I watched Dan Rather do this. I'm no Dan Rather, but he always asks if there's one question I didn't ask you, what should I have asked you?
I can't. I'd like to say something before we get to that, because there is something that you did ask that we kind of skipped. Okay. And I just wanted to offer this. When we were talking, sometimes the world, when I was teaching the Creative Void Teaching Project, a lot of the teachers were like people in the world. They felt as though they were very apologetic. They said, no, I can't possibly be involved in an Indigenous education program because I don't know enough. And, Indian teachers were saying this too, and non-Indian teachers, of course. And on the one side, sometimes you'd have people who really felt guilty. I can't teach about this because my grandfather, or somebody else who feels they'd have kids who were really bitter in the class, they were going through such terrible things. And I made up this little metaphor, this little story about Indigenous people somewhere in the world. They're out on the plains, and they bend over and they're picking things up and they put it into a bag. And they pick something up, put it into a bag, and we ask the kids, what are they picking up? And the kids say, oh, food, berries, wood or rocks. And I said, no, they're picking up buffalo chips. And the kids are like, buffalo chips? That's manure. No, but it's dried buffalo chips. They put this dried buffalo chips, this guilt and this bitterness. You let it dry out. You put it in that sack and you bring it back to the community. And what you can do with this dried buffalo chips is you can do the one thing that human beings alone can do. You can make fire. You can extend the length of the light of day. You can create warmth with this dried buffalo chips, this guilt and this bitterness. Or you can do something entirely different. You can spread it on your existing garden and grow something brand new with this other stuff that people are telling you to repress or throw away or forget it or something. No, but the secret is you let it dry out. You don't use it while it's still stinky. So you let your emotions about the world calm down. And then what songwriters and other artists can do, it's like we're photographers. We take a picture of something, and then we turn it into something. We give it to the world in a whole new way. And I think that's what songwriters can do, what artists can do. But you don't smear it on your face, this guilt, this bitterness, this manure, while it's wet. No, it's not your badge of identity. You don't have to carry it around with you all the time. No, it's there forever as just fuel. You use it like fuel.
I wish more people could hear your message. I'm involved right now with a friend who is part Dene, and she was taken away from the tribe by the Indian relocation program. Her mother was, and she was born in Ohio and adopted. And so she's 50 now, and dedicated herself to getting to know her tribe. She moved to New Mexico. And it's been very hard for her. It's been, she's been told she's not Indian enough, that she wasn't raised on the river, so she's not Indian. And really, they tried to cancel her and her entire business because there's such rancor and bitterness. I would love more people to hear your message, because it's such a hard way.
And Jewel, I think what you say, it applies to everybody really in every way. Rankism, and bullying, they just need to be abandoned. And so many of us are in that position of just being erased and canceled.
Yeah.
So how do we spread the word? How do we get involved? How do we share this message with the world?
I think we have to get it off the big table and get it right into families. I think that bullying, pedophilia, all kinds of rankism, any kind of ism you can think of, it all starts in the home. And that's the hardest place. That's where we really have to deal with it, is in the home and in our own hearts. It's putting an end to the war in the human heart. We need to get rid of bullying, abuse, alcohol, drugs in the home that are causing such chaos. People are, God bless you, Jewel, for the work you're doing. It's really good to hear about it.
Well, that goes back to Jewel saying, you don't hide from your pain. If you embrace your pain and face it, and don't follow that same emotional language, learn a new emotional language and don't perpetuate that, what you've learned. I mean, that right there changes someone's life, just to have that realization.
And it's just the realization. You don't have to tear the system down. If you think you have to tear the system down, you're licked. You don't. You just need to replace it with something that's more attractive and more fun, that tastes better, sounds better, write songs.
And I think a lot of insecurity breeds hate. Insecurity breeds trying to control somebody else's behavior. And so when there are I don't know if woke's the right word. I like that word, woke. But when you have sort of really extreme activists that are engaging in cancel culture, you have to actually look at the motivation, because when you are comfortable and secure in who you are, you're going to exude more compassion. And only through compassion can we create an environment or an attitude that would even begin to get somebody to talk to you or think about changing these deep-seated behaviors, these entrenched behaviors. And so to me, it's almost a little embarrassing, because it's flashing a neon sign to your own hurt. The more you're trying to cancel somebody, the more you're basically advertising, I don't know who I am. And I'm so insecure about who I am. I need to become so rigid that I need you not to be who you are. And so it comes back to sitting in quiet, getting to know who you are. What do you stand for? Are you consistent? Because a lot of my life, I'd be like, I think I stand for this, but I stand for X and I behave like Y. That's a problem. That's a conflict. There's a lot for us to work on in ourselves before we ever get to even having a comment on anyone else.
But I think too, in both of your stories, you both talk about removing armor and finding acceptance and vulnerability, finding that you can connect. And it's so scary to be vulnerable to someone, when so much has happened to you, you wear this armor. But magic things happen when you take that armor off. Do you feel like people can learn vulnerability?
I think it's all about compassion and kindness. And I think we need to make it hip. People are afraid to take off their armor because, they've been hurt a lot. But compassion and kindness can go so far. And I love what the Dalai Lama says about, you always have the best tool for peace with you at all the time. It's just your smile. And I don't believe that I can go out and cure somebody else of anything, but I sure can represent things that work for myself. And when I'm feeling lost and alone, by practicing compassion and kindness and paying attention to what's beautiful around me, whatever it is, it really does the trick for me. It makes me feel better. So I don't know. I'm not the kind of person who enrolls in like yoga classes or other people do, but as a loner, I find as though if I'm feeling bad, just turning it around and practicing compassion and kindness to other people will get the doggone self-spotlight off little me and onto something I can do about something.
Jewel, meditation is a big part of your practice, and you talk about gratitude practice. what is gratitude practice? How does meditation work for you?
I started to realize when I was 18, during that time I was homeless, I was having really bad panic attacks and was agoraphobic, stealing a lot. My life wasn't going well. And I remembered a quote that was attributed to Buddha about basically happiness doesn't depend on who you are, what you have. It depends on what you're thinking. And I had my thoughts left. So I decided to see if I could turn my life around one thought at a time. And that led me down this incredible pathway of exploration and curiosity within myself. And that was basically me discovering mindfulness. That word wasn't around. Mindfulness just means conscious presence. I'm trying to be consciously present, because if you can observe a behavior and create a gap before you act on that behavior, power is here. This is change. Meditation is a muscle. Meditation is a workout. It builds the muscle of presence. It helps you build the ability to stay consciously present for longer and longer periods of time. That won't change your life, though. I wanted to change my life. I wanted to change my habits. And so it's what I call putting mindfulness in motion. Now that I was present, right? Now that I got my car off of autopilot and I got present and my car was in neutral, where did I want to go? You just have to start replacing old behaviors with new behaviors. You have to start using your conscious presence to recreating, new neural pathways or whatever you want to do with it. So to me, that's the real value. Anything can be a mindfulness exercise. Writing a song is so great because it forces us to be present. When you're creatively engaged, when you're curious, when you're observant, you're being mindful. And so that's a hack, I guess. And when I realized there was only two basic states of being, my body was either dilated or contracted. And then when I realized every thought, feeling, or action led to one of those two states, and that you cannot be in two states at once, right? You can't be dilated and contracted, not at the same time. So I realized when I was anxious, contracted, and tight, if I engaged in things that caused me to dilate, I could hack my way out of a panic attack. I could hack my way out of anxiety. That's exactly what Buffy's talking about. When you're tight, anxious, feeling out of your flow, compassion is a dilating emotion. Gratitude is a dilating emotion. Generosity is a dilating emotion. Behaviors like volunteer work, connecting to somebody, walking in nature. And so, if you want to start keeping lists, I was able to keep lists. Oh, these are the thoughts, feelings, and actions that dilate me. These are the thoughts, feelings, and actions that contract me. Now I have to insert some discipline and stop doing the shit that contracts me. Mm-hmm. And make myself do the things that dilate me. And that starts to break it down into a very simple way of why is gratitude important? Why is compassion important? Because we can't do anything unless we're in a dilated position to behave better.
Yeah. Like even starting small, like today walking in, it's a beautiful sunny day in Cleveland, Ohio. And I just stopped and stared at the sky. The sky right above where it gets really deep and blue in the middle, not when it falls off, to the horizon, but the deep blue middle. And, walking up here at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, smiling and saying hello to a stranger, just starting small, little things like that. And it makes you feel good. Well, anyway, thank you both so much for your time. I wish that we had hours and hours. If you do end up going on a road trip together in a van, you don't have to invite me, but at least call me just so I can, check in and see what y'all are doing.
I would love it. And I have so many questions. I have so many questions for Buffy. Really quick, Buffy, did you play guitar on the track when you did Up Where We Belong? Are you playing that guitar part?
On my own version or on the Joe Cocker?
Your own version.
I played one guitar and my friend Patrick Cockett played it on the other guitar.
It's awesome. Loving your tunings. When I was looking at everybody's versions of your songs, what a cool thing. Elvis covered your songs. Barbara Streisand's version of your song is flawless. Janice doing Codeine. I think she called it Codeine, but incredible. What a cool thing, man.
Thank you. Thanks. It really is. It's just such a joy to have other artists take your song into their lives, and it's really a compliment.
Yeah. There's so many, barriers that you broke just by being you, your Oscar that you won. It's just neat. It was just really fun. I've always been a fan, but getting to sit down and really even do more research, and then just seeing how you show up here with such light and enthusiasm and youth is just heroic. And just glad
Well,
you're alive. Glad you're doing your thing.
I've had some real good fun in Alaska. You know, I scored the movie Spirit of the Wind, which is about George Atla, the dog sled racer, and that turned into a song on my latest album. You got to run, you got to run. You know, you got to run a marathon for breast cancer, or you got to run for an election if you don't like the way things are going, or you got to run your own life. How about that? And then also, you bring back such memories just being in Cleveland today at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I used to play a place called Le Cave in the 60s, and I got snowed in Cleveland one time for weeks. But I was held over, right? And it was just I have such nice memories of Cleveland back in the old days.
I'm not a native Clevelander. I grew up in Texas, actually, and I moved here to do this job. But hopefully soon, I'm going to advocate both of you deserve and should be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you know, it's been something I've been working on. And in this year's class, we have a lot of women, a lot of that female spirit represented. And you know, both of you will be in here one day. I just know it. I just know it in my heart.
Buffy, I was so curious with, you know, when I was coming around in the 90s, I'd be in a little circle and there'd be journalists with different songwriters. And I remember sitting with Beck. I love Beck. And they were like, Beck, how did you write the lyric? You know, I'm a loser, baby. Why don't you kill me? What made you write it? What were you thinking about? And he answered. And then they got to me and my song, Whole Save Your Soul, was out. And they were like, Jewel, what's your favorite nail color? And do you have any tips for it not chipping? And I was like, what?
Oh my
God. It was so hard to be taken seriously. I just was curious what your experience like that was, because I remember sitting down with the songwriter and him going, wow, you write like a man. Like that was a compliment. Like how much of that, you're such a serious writer, right? You're such a smart writer. Was it hard? Did people take you seriously? Did you see male counterparts with lesser lyrics get taken more seriously?
I still have people come up to me in airports and insist that Donovan wrote Universal Soldier and Codine. It's all over the internet that he did. And as a matter of fact, Smithsonian Magazine called me up many years ago, and they said, we have these bags of mail. You've engendered more mail than anything else in the history of Smithsonian Magazine, because one of us in this magazine had written something about soldiers who had carved lyrics into their gun stocks and their bunks and trunks and things. And they had said that it was an unknown lyric, right? That this unknown soldier had written, he's the one who gives his body as a weapon to a war. And without him, all this killing can't go on. And they sent me hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters disputing this. And a lot of them still said that Donovan wrote the song. So
wow.
Because other people said that they had written Until It's Time for You to Go, but I found out early, having given away the publishing for Universal Soldier for $1. That's how green I was in Greenwich Village. But I learned to copyright and to copy protect my songs. And so when somebody disputed and said they wrote Until It's Time for You to Go, I said, no. Here's the paperwork. So, you know, you learn as an artist, you learn what's going on. But
I do find that frustrating, you know, when it comes to awards and accolades. You know, I remember in the press, I was called Pollyanna and naive, and my lyrics are anything but that.
Really?
And it's just very sexist. You really struggle as a female singer-songwriter. The male singer-songwriters are just taken with more gravitas, and they don't give and afford that gravitas to the women. It's quite interesting.
Well, we know now. We know.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm not a songwriter, but it happens in the business professional world too. And you know, you gotta just smile, use your smile, and use your charm, and use your knowledge, and not be aggressive unless you have to. And it takes you twice as long to get taken seriously. Agreed. That's
well, it was a pleasure, Buffy. Can't wait to hang out with you in Hawaii. I'm coming. I'm going to move in with you.
Okay, it's a deal. I look forward to it.
All right. I'll talk to you guys later.
Thank you. Thank you
See you
both.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.